Hey everyone, you're listening to Fantasy Uptick. I'm Jeremiah Blue, and today we're going to be talking about the NFL schedule and the fantasy implications that it has on the different players throughout the league and the teams. And I'm going to be doing my analysis, or at least my initial analysis, based off this stuff. Now, obviously, this is really early in the process of creating rankings and those kind of things. I'm just going to be talking about the things that I saw that jumped off the page at me immediately. So first off, I look at the buys, and you might be going, well, why would you be looking at the buys that far out? Depending on when your playoff starts, you're not going to want to draft guys like Tampa and Carolina, because if your playoffs, which I know a lot of ESPN leagues, because they cut off that week 17, and they like to do the 2-round playoffs, will start their playoffs on week 13. Tampa and Carolina on bye week 13. So most leagues start their playoffs around 14 to 16. So that's just something to think about. If your playoffs start in week 13, you want to stay away from those guys. But I also like to look at the latest buys, because I like to draft those guys. Those are guys that are kind of tiebreakers for me, because a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who's on Carolina, whose buy's not until week 13, obviously Christian McCaffrey's going first, and we're going to talk. And to me, I think the schedule has made it even more so that, like, there's not even a debate with me anymore that Christian McCaffrey goes first. Not that there was, but he even got more stock this year than most years. I think he's so far ahead the one because he has the bye week 13, which means he's going to get rest and 2 weeks to prep for the first round of your playoffs. And if you're on that fringe of getting in, getting out, depending on when your trade deadline is, you're going to know that that's coming. So let's say your trade deadline happens in week 11, right? And you know you need to win the next 3 weeks. You need to win week 11, week 12, and week 13. Christian McCaffrey has loads of trade value in any format, right? And at that point, now you could trade him for a guy who's going to play 3 weeks, and you can get that win. Somebody just like a notch below. Maybe it's Saquon, maybe whoever it is, because you know you need players that are going to be playing in those games because you're trying to get into the playoffs, right? Strength of schedule, I do take that into account, but the NFL teams change so much through the offseason. The team that was really good at the pass last year is probably not going to be the best team at the pass this year, or it could be, but you're not going to know that, right? So what I do know is that there's a handful of teams that I have a lot of faith in that are going to be really, really good. So rather than look at the whole schedule, I like to look at the fantasy football playoffs. So if we go to week 14, 15, 16, which is the standard fantasy football playoffs, the most important week is 14, right? Because you make the playoffs, you want to make it to the next round. So that's the first one I look at, but I also like to look at the playoffs in general. There's a couple of guys that jump off the page, and this is going to be similar to the Christian McCaffrey thing, because Christian McCaffrey, I actually think he's got an easy playoff, and the guys he's being compared against, from a running back perspective, Saquon Barkley has the worst schedule this year according to last year's stats. Now, he's got a relatively easy playoff go, but Christian McCaffrey's got a better schedule, then the bye right before the playoffs, and then a relatively easy playoff run himself. And then you take a guy like Dalvin Cook, who's right there with the Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley's. He goes up against Tampa, the team that was number one against the run last year. Now, again, they might not be as good, but we know what that coaching staff wants to do. They want to take away the run, right? So they're going to take away the run. I do not want to start Dalvin Cook that week if you're giving me the option to start Dalvin Cook or Saquon Barkley, or the option to start Dalvin Cook or Zeke against the Bengals in week 14. Again, so that's going to move Dalvin Cook a little bit down my board, and I was higher than Dalvin Cook than anybody last year. You can go back and check my video. I'll put it in the description from last season if you just want to double check me. But Dalvin Cook was my number 5 ranked running back last year when everybody else in the fantasy football world had him at 12. Like, I knew how good Dalvin Cook was. I knew the offensive line made adjustments in Minnesota. I knew he was going to be good. But this year I look at the schedule and I'm just sorry. Like, it's going to be tough. First round of playoffs, Tampa, who was the number 1 team last year. We all know what Chicago Bears defense can be. Last year, they struggled because of Mitch Trubisky just like keeping them on the field so much. The offense never got going. Now they got Nick Foles, which I do think Nick Foles, especially with the schedule that they have, Chicago is one of the big winners in schedule as well. Plus, they're getting another year of experience for guys like David Montgomery, who I absolutely love this year based off of his draft stock. I mean, even Tevin Coleman, if you're in a PPR league or a half-point PPR league, because I think that offense is going to be a lot better, assuming Nick Foles wins the job. And if he doesn't win the job, that's going to be because Mitch Trubisky made huge adjustments in his game and improved so that he can get the job back. Because if we go just 2 years ago, Mitch Trubisky didn't look all that bad. So maybe he just had an off year, whatever. The point is they got two quarterbacks there, an easy schedule, a team that's getting better. And that defense, I'm assuming, is going to be better because I assume the offense can't be any worse than it was last year. So going back to Dalvin Cook, he's got to play Tampa, then Chicago, and then New Orleans in the championship game, which none of those are really easy matchups for a running back. Not one of those guys is going to kind of move him down the board a little bit. On the flip side, you get a guy like Derrick Henry, who might have a rougher schedule in the season, but then he goes up against Jaguars, then Detroit, who they drafted a cornerback in the first round, so they're not going to be that much better up front. And then Green Bay, who I'm not scared of Green Bay defensively, so this is just an easy matchup all the way down. That's what you're looking for. Three guys, because I assume I'm going to get into the playoffs. Now, maybe you guys are in leagues that are expert leagues and they're really hard, and it's more, you got to put more of an emphasis on getting into the playoffs, which is fine. I'm in one of those leagues where I am nervous about making the playoffs every year, but that has more to do with that it's a dynasty league and my team is just not that good because of the setup, and I'm not going to get into it. But there is one league where I'm more concerned with getting to the playoffs than I am with what I'm going to do once I get into the playoffs. But in most leagues, if you're listening to this, that means you're probably one of the better players in your, because I mean, like, nobody's listening to this right now. So you're one of the better players in your league because you're putting in the effort. So I think you'll make the playoffs. So if you're listening to me right now, you need to be worried about what you're going to do once you get to the playoffs. So guys like Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, they were huge winners in the schedule because they got easy schedules. And I know you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to draft a quarterback high. But the gap between those two based off of their playoff schedule and these other guys that you'd be wasting high picks on, I guess my argument is I'm either going to get one of those two guys or I'm going to wait, right? So if one of those two guys falls to me at the right spot, and again, my rankings aren't built, and they change based off of what kind of league you're in. Like if you're in a Superflex league, they're going in the first round. If you're in a 16-team league, they're going to be going relatively high. And if you're in a 6 points per passing touchdown league, Mahomes should be going way up here, right? There are certain rules that are in certain leagues that you kind of want to get these guys. So Mahomes and Lamar Jackson have easy playoff schedules. If we look at the next guys, just kind of ADP, you got Dak, Watson, and Murray. Dak plays San Francisco in Week 15. I'm not going to feel comfortable starting Dak Week 15, the second round of the playoffs, against San Francisco when I could rather just start like Aaron Rodgers against Carolina, right? Or Deshaun Watson, Week 14, first round of the playoffs against Chicago when, again, going back to like Rodgers, who I think has a good playoff schedule and is kind of that middle-of-the-pack quarterback, Detroit, right? He destroys Detroit. So give me that guy that I can kind of mix in with like a Ben Roethlisberger and just kind of make my decisions throughout the year as opposed to taking guys like Dak, Watson. Murray's got a pretty good playoff schedule, but in Week 16, he has to play San Francisco. So Murray's actually going to move up to my number 3 as of today, which is way early. It's only May 11th, just because I think he's got an easy schedule coming into the playoffs. He's got an easy schedule at the beginning of the playoffs. And if I can make it to the championship and now I got to worry about San Francisco, well, I would have had a plan for that earlier on. I'll find somebody in Week 16 that I'm going to like in that week. Or maybe Murray's having that big of a year. San Francisco dropped off just a little bit, and I'll be comfortable starting them. But again, I'm not going to reach for these guys based off of that idea that, hey, if I'm going to draft a quarterback high, he better be there for me in the fantasy playoffs. That's why I'm taking him. And there is an argument to be made about quarterbacks because they produce so many more points than those other positions. So here are some of my winners. Again, we talked about Chicago, Tampa, and San Francisco, or Tampa we talked about based off the bye. But Chicago and San Francisco, there is no byes in Week 12. So byes for Week 11, that's great. These three teams have easy schedules all year and good playoff schedules. So Chicago goes up against Houston, Minnesota, and the Jags. I think the Jags are going to be atrocious this year. I think they're just going to be terrible. I keep looking at their roster thinking, how are they even going to win games? Because Minshew, while I'm not hating on Minshew, and he could be good, but if you look at the other 32 quarterbacks in the league, he's like really close to the bottom. You might look at Washington, but he's way down there, and he's surrounded by less talent. Leonard Fournette, I'm not like a super believer in Leonard Fournette. I do think he will be treated like a workhorse at this point right now, but I don't think he's good enough to get them wins, and that defense looks real bad. I mean, they're just really young. They'll be good again, but right now they're really, really young. They're losing guys, and they're not replacing them with guys of equal caliber. And then you got San Francisco, like I said, they got a pretty easy schedule down. They start against Washington, Dallas, and Arizona. At least their running backs got a good schedule. I don't know if I'm going after Jimmy Garoppolo or any of those receivers, but the running backs are there. And if you're late in the draft, that might be people you would target because of the easy schedule. And then Chicago, I really love Chicago's schedule. Chicago's schedule all the way around. Like I said, Tampa already, and again, they got Week 13 bye, so you got that trade bait late in the year. Big losers for me is, and I'm not drafting Josh Allen in any league, basically, because the playoff schedule is Pittsburgh, Denver, Pats, and I just think those three teams are going to be really stout against the pass. And Josh Allen is right on that cusp of that, like the top of the next tier already, like right around that 7 tier. And I would just rather wait on Wentz and Rodgers and Ryan and those guys as opposed to getting Josh Allen because I know I'm going to be uncomfortable starting him in the fantasy football playoffs. Jaguars, they're losers because they're losers. They're just bad. They're a bad team. And then they get Tennessee, Baltimore, and Chicago. While Tennessee's not that bad, Baltimore and Chicago, like, I'm going to be rolling Leonard Fournette out there in round 2 against Baltimore. It's going to be rough. First of all, they're going to get way behind, way early. And then the fantasy playoffs, I'm going up against Chicago. If I can avoid drafting a guy like that and I can draft someone else like a Derrick Henry, which Derrick Henry should be going way ahead of Leonard Fournette. But if I can get someone else at that range, I will rather go with the other guy as opposed to a guy like Leonard Fournette because of the playoff schedule, you know? And I do take a look at it. Again, this is just my early look. I might do a little bit more talk about the playoff schedules later, but for now, this is just my first reaction to these. Some teams that are just flat-out winners just all across the board is Indy has a really good schedule this year. I really, really like the guys on Indy because their schedule's good all the way through. And then the Chargers have a really good schedule, which I was low on the Chargers coming into this, but then after seeing the schedule, I'm kind of like, oh man, they got some easy matchups. It's going to be hard for them to be bust this year, even with Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert having their battles, which I think Tyrod Taylor will end up winning early in the year, and obviously Herbert, once they become eliminated from the playoffs, if they become eliminated from the playoffs, Herbert will step in and they'll see what he's kind of got. And then one of the biggest losers for me, and this is something I've already talked about on my channel, is basically I'm a big Cam Akers guy, and I compared him to Dobbins. But then I look at this schedule, and Cam Akers to me has 9 elite run defenses on his schedule, and then his playoff schedule is absolutely brutal. He's going up against the Pats, the Jets, and then the Seahawks. This might make me move him under Dobbins in redraft leagues just based on that alone, because it's going to be tough for me to roll out a rookie, even if he has a breakout, even if he's as good as I think he is. These defenses are just too good. And the Baltimore Ravens, they got an easy schedule right off the bat, and then the efficiency that Dobbins will receive being in that Baltimore Ravens offense versus the quantity that I think Cam Akers will get is vastly different. So I think I might be moving Dobbins over Cam Akers, even though I just did a video about having Akers over Dobbins. But this information on the schedule has kind of changed my tune. I deeply appreciate you guys listening to the show. That's it for today. If you have any questions, comments, anything you would like me to talk about, I've been very active in the comments. So if you got anything you think I said wrong or you disagree with, go ahead, ask the question. If you don't mind, hit a like, subscribe. That would really help us out. Till next time, see ya.